Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Picking Bones. I'm your host, Eric Jones, and today we're going to be talking about giants in England. This is a really interesting topic, looking at folklore in England and Scotland and Ireland. So let's jump into this. This will be a shorter video. We're just going to overview some interesting topics, though. So Albion is the older name for Britain, and looking at the original legends around Albion is a truly fascinating topic. Much of the early British history is very mixed up with folklore and myth, and it can be kind of difficult to sort out what exactly is true and what is fantastical. And much of the early British history is treated as nothing but myth, is treated as simple fable. But, looking at these events, it certainly doesn't seem that it's all fable in my mind. And certainly others agree with this, including George R.R. Tolkien himself. Mixing up my mind a little bit. So anyway, Tolkien himself argued that some of these myths were true, and especially when we get to Hengist and Horsa, which we've talked about in one of my other videos. So anyway, a lot of this stuff, it's hard to sort out, but it's debated what's true and false. Troy, even the legend of Troy, this city was thought to be nothing but a fable. They thought maybe this story was based off of a real city, but that Troy wasn't real. Of course, it turns out that Troy was a real city. So much of this history that has been treated as myth has been proven correct. And we're going to look specifically at the history of the kings of Britain, this classic work by Geoffrey of Monmouth. And in this book, it goes through a lot of different history. It eventually gets into the legend of King Arthur and Merlin at the end, in the later chapters. But in the first book of this work, we have the tale of Brutus and Quirinius. And these fellows were part of the Trojan War, and after the war happens, essentially these two leaders get together and sail off to the land of Albion to make a new home for themselves after this long war in Troy. And Brutus, who is kind of the key more important figure, I suppose, of the two. Brutus is told by the goddess Diana to go and settle this land of Albion. And so it says here that the island was called Albion and inhabited by none but a few giants. Notwithstanding this, the pleasant situation of places and the plenty of rivers with abounding fish and the engaging prospect of its wood made Brutus and his company very desirous to fix their habitation in it. So in order to settle this wonderful land of plenty, Brutus and Quirinius have to fight off the giants and defeat the remainder of the giants on this island. Quirinius ends up defeating the cat. The Quirinius ends up defeating the leader of the giants by picking him up and throwing him off of a cliff. And this leader of the giants was called Gomagot. You may have heard of Gog and Magog. There are statues of Gog and Magog in Britain, and this is actually a reference to this story of this Gog-Magog or Gomagot figure being killed by Quirinius. And so much of this story is blown off entirely. It's treated as complete myth. And it's really weird if you go over to England how much they ignore even the King Arthur legends and this early British history. Even if they were to argue that this is fable, you would think that they would play up the folklore side of it for tourism, at least, But if you go to Totnes, this is where Brutus and Quirinius were supposed to have landed. And I went there. There's literally nothing there to talk about this place, where this is supposed to be where Britain was founded. The name Britain comes from Brutus. So Brutus and Quirinius conquer this land, they defeat the giants, and then he renames the land Britain, and after himself, after Brutus. So that is the very origin of the name of this land. So even if they believe it's fully mythological, why would you blow this off so hard as to have nothing in this town or in the country that talks about it? It's pretty interesting. And so here's some pictures of Totnes, because I did visit there when I went to England. And so this is the street where it's on. It's just a long, narrow street going up this hill. And here is the Brutus stone. It's just sitting in the middle of this street now for some reason. It's not in its original location. And there it is, in all its magnificence, the Brutus stone. Here's me, the only person in the world that seems to care about it. Here's also a snapshot of overlooking the town. So there's really not much going on there. I did get some really good pizza in Totnes. Surprisingly, here it is. It's quite delightful. But not much going on in Totnes. So I just thought it was so weird how much they blew off all the folklore. Because there would certainly be money in the tourism aspect, at least. So anyway, here is a painting of... I didn't even explain this part yet. So there's some another interesting connection to Albion and where the name Albion came from. So Britain came from Brutus renaming Albion, but the name Albion comes from this older story of the daughters of Diocletian. And Diocletian was said to have 33 daughters, the legend goes. And these 33 daughters rebelled against their husbands and murdered them. And to punish his daughters, the king sent them away to a distant land. And this land was Albion. This was before Brutus and Quirinius. And the legend says that these women came to this island and then they intermingled, they mated with dark spirits there and created giants. So that is the legend of Albion, and Brutus and Quirinius were said to have then come and defeated the giants after this earlier event. So here's Gog Magog. There are statues at the Guildhall in London of Gog and Magog, and there are events that people make big Gog and Magog floats and crap. So I also thought it was interesting to note, just while I was looking at this, Plymouth, right near Totnes is Plymouth. And I don't know if this is just like coincidence or what, but it is interesting that Plymouth Rock is where America was supposed to, the Mayflower landed, and it's kind of supposed to be the origin point for America. But this was named such because they bought the land from something called the Plymouth Company. I don't know. I was just wondering, though, if it was called even the Plymouth Company, though, because of its close proximity to Totnes and being an origin point for the land. So that seems likely to me, though I'm not sure if it's the case. But interesting little side note. Athelstan, he also ties into this. How does he tie in? Athelstan is I apologize. Athelstan is an important king, though. He's also mentioned in early British folklore, and this is so this is a Masonic website. It's the Masonic Order of Athelstan in England, Wales, and its provinces overseas. It says, who is King Athelstan? And Athelstan was said to be this guy who revived Freemasonry in its modern form. In the year 926 AD, the great legendary Grand Assembly at New York was said to have been held by King Athelstan's half-brother, Prince Edwin, wherein the great traditions of symbolic and operative masonry were constituted, revived, and organized, and a new code of laws for the governing of the craft instituted. Athelstan is also mentioned in the Regis poem, which is an early important Masonic manuscript. Why did I even have him there? He ties into this. Sorry, I'm lacking organization on this one, guys. I apologize. He's another one of these early kings, though, and early British figures that's kind of the history and the mythology is kind of blended together, and it's kind of very difficult to sort out what exactly is real and what's not. But generally, historians downplay a lot of this as myth. But it doesn't seem to all be myth to me. And to some, it seems to be very important. So here's another thing from the history of the kings of Britain, kind of another interesting connection. That history from Geoffrey of Monmouth talks about the figures Hengist and Horsa that I've mentioned. And Jefferson suggested that these figures should be used for the original Great Seal of America. And in one of his a biography on Jefferson by Merrill Peterson, we get this quote. From Jefferson. It says, "The Saxon chiefs from whom we claim the honor of being descended, and whose political principles and form of government we assumed." Speaking of Hengist and Horsa, so Jefferson says that we got our government, our form of government, and beliefs and such from these figures that are often treated as false. So I guess what connects a lot of these topics that we're looking at is that it's all treated as mythology, but we have some very important and interesting stuff going on here with kind of the origins of secret societies and also with kind of comparative mythology. It's very interesting to consider, is there truth to this story of these 33 daughters of Athelstan? When I was looking up sources for this, because I knew about this, but I was just kind of throwing something together for the video. I found this Dr. Caitlin Green's tweeting about this, and looks like she's focused on history and archaeology, and so this is her focus. But she comments on this tale of Diocletian's daughters. She says it's fascinating, by the way. Supposedly the first inhabitants of Britain, 33 daughters of Diocletian, set adrift for murdering their husbands, caught up in England, devoid of people. They name it Albion after the eldest daughter. So yeah, Albion, Albina, I believe was her name, and that's where it gets the name. They later lie with demons, give birth to a race of giants who inhabited the island until Brutus kills them and renames the land Britton after himself. So, of course, this is the same thing that happens in the Bible, where the sons of God come down and mate with the daughters of, the daughters of man, and create the Nephilim, or the giants. And it seems like this happens multiple times in the Bible, because we have the giants before and after the flood. And so it's very interesting to consider that this could be the true origin of Britain, this that comes from this story. And it's also, perhaps this is the true origin of the importance of the number 33 to occultists, because we have all of these legends connecting the origins of Masonry to kind of these early myths about the origins of Britain. And this is where it was said that Masonry was kind of reborn in its more modern form. So it's very interesting to look at all this stuff. We could go into a ton more depth on all of this. This is really just an overview of some of these topics that I was looking into a while back. But as I started pulling up some of my old sources for this stuff, it really made me just want to dig into this topic a lot more. I think that looking at European folklore is so fascinating, and just how it ties into our understanding of true history. So here's just some manuscripts. So these are the 33 daughters of Athelstan. I also, on a related note, there's also, on top of all the giant folklore in Britain and Scotland and all and the like, we also have fairy folklore, which is also very interesting. And I can't show you the exact source, but it is interesting to note that in fairy folklore, it's said that the fairy queen had a deal with Lucifer himself, and that to keep her freedom and for the fairies to be able to just kind of do what they want, separate from the demons of Lucifer, they had to present child human sacrifices to Satan every 7 years. That was the deal, that if the fairies would provide these human sacrifices, that Satan would let them continue to do their own thing and not be directly under his control. I don't know. There's a lot of really fascinating folklore to look at. Obviously, we could go in a lot more detail, but I just wanted to kind of overview this stuff for today. Wanted to get a video out and talk about something interesting for you fine folks. So that's all I've got for today, though. We'll certainly dig more into these topics, into the giants and into all of these things more. I'd like to go through Monmouth's whole entire history, the history of the kings of Britain, because there's a lot of fascinating stories in here, and gets into King Arthur and Merlin. And I'm not saying everything in this history is true, but I think there is a lot of truth in it that's been blown off, and I don't think that that's done in the name of truth. I think it's done to cover up certain things, important events in our history. So anyway, that's all for today, guys. Let me, since I'm doing this live, check if there's any questions here. No, we don't have any super active chat right now, so we're good, guys. We'll see you next time with another video next weekend. All right, have a good night, guys. Bye-bye.